be.
All right. Well, it is now my pleasure to bring to you Mr. Liam Lee and his paper, Friends, Fiction, or Both.
I all alone beweep my outcast state, yet in these thoughts myself almost decising, happily I think on thee, and then my state sings hymns at heaven's gates, where thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. In our capital-focused, commercialized society, the dignity of relationship is found in the boundaries and distance that are established through contractual agreements. Economic success is attributed to ignoring our neighbor's affairs and connecting only through impersonal means. However, looking back before the modern age, one can see that the ancients particularly understood the importance of true relationships. From Aristotle's ponderings in Nicomachean Ethics to Shakespeare's expression of friendship in his all-encompassing plays. Modernity, on the other hand, has a deep-seated loneliness problem that affects the human soul at its core. The abandonment of good friendship in contemporary times coincides with modern philosophical development. Few scholars, apart from Michel de Montaigne, actively wrestle with relationships. In friendship's place, intellectuals have poured economical and psychological theories into the molds of friendship that were intended to create awe and beauty. Why has the modern system been robbed of the vital friendship that leads one closer to God? What sources of modern literature and beauty is man able to draw from for inspiration relating to friendship? The digital age tries to convince us that we have reached the pinnacle of human knowledge. The totality of wisdom can be found a few finger clicks and internet pages away. But the loneliness all men feel should cause one to pause and reflect on how little we truly know about ourselves in relation to other people. Intuitively, we understand that the corrupted man does not simply rid himself of the rich aspects of life that lead him toward hope, but rather he replaces them with perversely similar alternatives, such as friendships based solely on pleasure or utility. Alternatives to the good friendship boast similar but ultimately hollow promises of personal fulfillment. In America, enterprise and economics on an individual scale are held in high regard. There is little explicit understanding that the collective is just as important as the person. The individual in relation to the community should not be valued more. The American virtue of independence and self-reliance, what makes America so great but isolates our communities and lives, is the poison that cripples our friendships. Aristotle and the ancient friendship. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. The American emphasis on personal privacy at the expense of the republic not only corrupts interpersonal relationships, but also erodes the essential trust and integrity in our society. Through Christ's vision of friendship and love, not relationships of naive tolerance, but faithful kindness, we find that in order to cultivate good friendships, we must strive toward a higher sense of good and love, which aligns us with virtue. Do humans pursue friendship in search of fulfillment through the good, or what is good for them? Aristotle describes the perfect friendship as a friendship of men who are good and alike in virtue, for these wish well alike to each other, qua good, and they are good in themselves. He terms the virtuous love shared between good friends as philia, meaning a strong mutual loyalty between individuals. Similarly, the word philosophy shares a similar root and describes the love of knowledge. There is wisdom in understanding the closeness that forming a good friendship has to pursuing truth as a philosopher. We do not create good friends simply based on geographic proximity or occasional fellowship, just as we cannot grasp knowledge by glancing at a lecture slide or flipping through a textbook. Both endeavors in friendship and truth require a virtuous outlook on the quest for the true good and a deep devotion toward their ends without selfish or rushed intent. Further, the good friendship is cultivated through shared experiences, a full spectrum of joy, sorrow, and virtue. As Aristotle writes, the true friendship requires time and familiarity. Men cannot know each other till they have eaten salt together, nor can they admit each other to friendship till each has been found lovable and been trusted by each. Whether it be bonding over a meal and conversation or working together through life's difficult problems, the act of living together provides the proper catalyst for building a true friendship. The good friendship is often equivocated with good experiences and mutual happiness without hardship. However, experiencing sin and pain in this world, but persevering through relationships is what allows us to pick ourselves up, know that things will be all right, and allow real hope to penetrate our stubborn souls. Overcoming conflict in the relationship or facing adversity together forges true fraternity. Suffering is part of the essence of friendship. Aristotle's musings on friendship wander away from the general sense of fraternity in the collective to the more intricate nature of relationships between individuals. Contrary to modern sentiment, which identifies with abstract concepts of the community and the collective that comprise the social fabric, Aristotle describes the true and good friendship in terms of people who achieve actual mutuality. Necessary for the true friendship, he explains, is the condition of reciprocating both love and goodwill. Further, mutualism fosters knowledge about a person's relations and ensures trust through full awareness of the other's identity. Aristotle is alluding to the broader idea that one cannot truly love what he does not know. The love described by Aristotle does not fulfill an individual temporarily, but provides an abiding source of character and accountability. The true friend bestows goodwill beyond short-sighted appeasement and will choose to confront his companion about his self-destructive vices, even if it places the friendship at risk. The friendless life is content to leave his neighbor as he is, and remain silent in the affairs of others. Aristotle's friendship, on the other hand, is indispensable to life. Without friends, no one would choose to live, though he had all other goods. When our lives are wrought with fear and pain, friendships ground us in the good, and our physical and spiritual comforts from the agony of a broken world. Certain interactions are inherently contractual. Services are rendered for a particular price, and the civility is contingent on the fulfillment of the agreement. One does not approach a waiter or salesperson to discuss their life or troubles. User relationships merely arise to fulfill particular desires, not as a good or end in themselves. Such love evaporates quickly once the want has been satisfied, and the payments, both financial and immaterial, have been exchanged, and the interaction is cleansed of any need for enduring commitment. A deep, Christ-centered relationship, on the other hand, is priceless in every definition of the world. Its services and benefits cannot be wooed through material or financial incentives, nor can it be ordered off the menu of life like one would a succulent steak. The true friendship is more akin to the relationship between Christ and the church, while friendships of utility and pleasure relate to associations between a shopper and a cashier. The literature of love. The primary imagination I hold to be the living power and prime agent of all human perception, and as a repetition in the finite mind of the eternal act of creation in the infinite I am. The good friendship does not merely lie in the present moment with our close associations. Its beauty is reflected in literature, and more importantly, artful depictions provide guidance and insight into how we ought to live our own lives. Meandering through Shakespeare plays with lovely examples of friendship is one of the foremost opportunities for such experiences. In Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, Antonio, a merchant, takes on debt for his friend Bassanio with a pound of flesh as collateral. The money allowed Bassanio to court his wife. However, Antonio loses the ability to pay back the loan. Even though taking a pound of flesh would kill Antonio, he selflessly offers himself for his friend. Antonio speaks to Bassanio before his sentence execution. Grieve not that I am fallen to this for you. When the tale is told, bitter be judge whether Bassanio had not once a love. Bassanio replies, life itself and all the world are not with me esteemed above thy life. Antonio's willing sacrifice and devotion beautifully capture the essence of true friendship. Despite the mercantile and exploitative culture they live in, both Antonio and Bassanio transcend economic terms and offer up their lives. Shakespeare's characters symbolize the proper sense of friendship as articulated by Aristotle, defining relationships by love and understanding rather than practical determinations. In Hamlet, Horatio laments the impending death of his friend Hamlet at the end of the play. In grief, he even considers following Hamlet to the grave. However, Hamlet gasps, if thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, absent thee from felicity a while, and in this harsh world draw thy breath in pain to tell my story. Horatio faithfully remains to share the story of Hamlet in his friend's honor. Throughout the play, Horatio characterizes a true friend, dependently expressing love despite Hamlet becoming increasingly distressed and troubled. Some might dismiss these stories as fictions and not nuanced depictions of true friendship. However, both plays arise primarily out of incredible misfortune and suffering. Shakespeare's ability to paint fine and delicate lines of bright friendship around tragedy mimics the reality of friendships in life. Friendships allow man to hopefully orient himself toward the Lord and see the goodness that will eventually overcome the brokenness. Literature and the truth found in it demonstrate how good friendship comes to define us. Though some may be convinced that their identity lies in the abstract concepts of their culture or communities, in actuality, we grasp a proper understanding of ourselves by seeing our reflection in those around us and in art. Our self-image and soul are held steadfast by the great I am and the friendships he blesses us with, and not by our false cultural idols of identity. Through creativity, we both develop and secure identities, which shapes our communities and congeals the viscous concepts of culture. Love is greater than fear. I wasn't actually in love, but I felt a sort of tender curiosity. In The Prince, Machiavelli outlines a severely practical vision of virtue and vice, seeing benefit to oneself as a true indication of goodness rather than the nature of the act itself. Using calculation and manipulation, the intelligent statesman and citizen orients his relationships strategically to retain power and maintain his place in society. Though we may scoff at the violent stereotypes of Machiavellian thought, with some reflection, we should ask ourselves how our society is meaningfully different than Machiavellian vision of inducing fear over love as a state of living. Machiavelli asserts that, above all, he must abstain from the property of others because men forget the death of a father more quickly than the loss of patrimony. According to Machiavelli, people fear losing their possessions and self more than the pain of losing a loved one. How much does our property and fear control our memory and love, a crucial part of friendship? Our technological spaces cause our relationships to be confined by give and take conditions based on the fear of missing out, whether it be political strategy or Instagram likes. Spoiled with instant emotion, we are led quickly to forget our forefathers, our relationships, and most devastatingly, our Savior. When we latch onto the fear of being perceived poorly through technological interfaces and orient our lives to the optics of platforms, devices, and others. Meaningful relationships help us appreciate the lives we have been given, but they are admittedly difficult to cultivate. Aristotle's true friendship is rare. However, because those relationships are exceptional, they are dearly precious. Machiavelli is skeptical of these remarkable friendships because his paradigm relies fundamentally on worldly definition of benefit. He writes, "For friendships that are acquired at a price and not with greatness and nobility of spirit are bought, but they are not owned, and when the time comes they cannot be spent. Love is held by a chain of obligation which is broken at every opportunity for utility." Machiavelli's arguments have merit insofar as he accurately understands that love is often twisted into personal gain. However, he then abandons love for fear and power, since their effects are more absolute. He does not understand the heavenly vision of cultivating love and friendship so that we may have communion with others in a spiritual sense. Some might suggest that friendships are only non-essential luxuries of life that generally hinder success in areas of true fulfillment, such as self-improvement or career advancement. While it is true that overindulgence can lead to complacency, abandoning friendship forsakes the community that our fellowship brings and the vibrant relationships that must necessarily accompany any life well lived. Socrates diagnoses the Machiavellian person long before such a concept arose, saying that such men in their early days live with flatterers, and they themselves flatter others in order to gain their ends. But they soon discard their followers when they have no longer any need of them. They are always either masters or servants. The joys of friendship are unknown to them. The man who has motives in friendship beyond the mere delight of companionship and love is no different than the tyrant Socrates describes. One uses the state and twists it towards his own wicked ends without care for the interests of those for which he is responsible, while the other exploits relationships to advance his status or luxuries. Socrates is adamant that the despot will ultimately despair and fail in his selfishness, and a similar outcome awaits the one who is a tyrant of other souls. Don Corleone, the dying gasp of friendship. "I have no one near me, gentle yet courageous, possessed of a cultivated as well as a capricious mind, whose tastes are like my own, to approve or amend my plans." Most have autocrats, dictators, and mob bosses come to mind when one thinks of a Machiavellian reality and see the figures in opposition to the ancient friendship. However, we see a moment of a schism between the Aristotelian versus the Machiavellian perspective on friendship in the infamous opening scene of Mario Puzo's The Godfather. Mafia Don Vito Corleone, head of the Corleone family, is accepting requests for business and help on the day of his daughter's wedding. Amerigo Bonasera, an undertaker, understands that no request is denied on the day of a Sicilian wedding and is attempting to seek vengeance for his daughter, who was brutally attacked. Bonasera claims that he believes in America and that he sought justice from the police. But the legal system fails, and the Don quips that America has ruled. The court gave you justice. In the end, Vito accepts the request, but only after Bonasera becomes his friend. Being the Don's friend means much more than paying him for his services. It demands profound duties and reciprocity, much like the friendship outlined by Aristotle and contrary to the American ideals which propose clinical disassociation. The title Godfather is bestowed to Corleone because his friendship represents guardianship and protection akin to that which is ordained through the church. It is not a frivolous matter. Some might wonder why Don Corleone provides one of the few modern examples of deep friendship and question whether the harsh tactics of the mafia align with the good. It is true that these demonstrations have a sense of absolutism and extreme tactics, which could be labeled as Machiavellian. However, this ultimately is a diagnosis of the current society and its lack of nuanced forms of friendship. We develop friendships modeled after the myopic cultural ideal, where our lives are happy-go-lucky and no complex hardship or moral dilemmas come our way. Aristotle asserts that the good friendship cannot be formed, but wicked men have no steadfastness, for they do not remain even like to themselves. Vito Corleone characterizes the man of strong ambition who recognizes his solemn duty to his people and has a longing for the achievement of great things. But he is ultimately wicked man who faces conflicting questions regarding his family and friends and symbolizes an incomplete friend, unlike Horatio or Bassanio, who represent the whole. Few thinkers in modernity, apart from Michel de Montaigne, have captured the vital essence of good friendship. Montaigne articulates the difference between meaningful and superficial relationships. In the relationships which bind us only by one small part, we need to look out only for the imperfections that particularly concern that part. The religion of my doctor or my lawyer cannot matter. The ancient relationship of Don Corleone is different from the modern understanding of contracts and relationships. The diligence due of old is total self-sacrifice, while the new only requires particular duties outlined by agreements. We have forgotten the friendship which pivots on more than just favors. Though it may be an unconventional inspiration, perhaps art legends about the mafioso contain a secret wisdom about the lost art of friendship. That relationship entails utter devotion in a selfless sense. A poor understanding of the good friendship forces one to compromise virtue and judgments in other parts of his life. Defining justice and love first requires a grasp of the good friendship. Without any concept of our relationships, our allusions to broad values such as love and mercy are merely ominous echoes of the true friendship experience. Otherwise, man will fall victim to the justice of Polemarchus in the Republic. A friend ought to do good to a friend and never evil, and they are to receive what we owe them. And an enemy, as I take it, owes to an enemy that which is due or proper to him, that is to say, evil. Socrates' understanding of a higher form of justice contrasts with Polemarchus' pragmatic view. The Apostle Matthew writes of Jesus, "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust." Indeed, our brokenness inclines us to naturally favor only those who are convenient to love. Yet God made and loves his creation in its totality, and his sacrifice on the cross was not particular. His gift applied to those who set themselves against him. Christians are thus called to emulate the heavenly joy shown to us by sacrificing for he who gave himself to even his enemies. Wrongs ought not to dissuade us from expressing love to others. However, unlike the Christian ethic where we are called to love even our enemies toward an eternal blessing, worldly friendship does not seem to rise above the standard of utilitarian friendships, wherein we expect only good from those to whom we offer our kindness. For all of human history, man has understood the important place that friendship has in supporting our lives and institutions through troubling times. From the ancient, Aristotle observed that friendship seems to hold states together and lawgivers care more for it than for justice. For unanimity seems to be something like friendships, and this they aim at most of all. The love that neighbors, in both a geographical but also spiritual sense, feel for each other form the structure on which justice and liberty rest. Friendship adheres us, as Montaigne describes. In true friendship, our souls mingle and blend with each other so completely that they efface the seam that joined them and cannot find it again. Without friendship, the tower of the state will be doomed to topple, and its interpretations of profoundly human concepts will fall awry. Because friendship is the social order, the distrust that pervades our modern politics and the hate for our neighbor we express resulting from the yard sign they have on their lawn threatens our self-governing nation. Loneliness ahead? The perfect friendship is not formulated on self-centered intentions. Rather, it arises by self-sacrificial motives, which paradoxically provide the individual with a proper sense of self. Man is a collective being. He will consider himself most belonging in deep fellowship with others. We find purpose in ourselves not through the temporal false promises of self-care and personal seclusion, but through the selfless acts of friendship which allow us to become a greater whole and more than a baser part. Some may claim that outlining the proper forms of friendship and the great necessity for them may paradoxically pose as ulterior motives in building friendships. However, the charge that one ought to undertake toward the good friendship is as unobscure as it is unbiased. Love God, love others, and love well. It is often said that God is love and that our lives should be lived in stewardship of that love. But how are we to truly worship and honor the Lord in this world? It is not by wishful thinking towards an abstract concepts where one's actions can be characterized by goodwill. Rather, we love well through our actions. Understanding how the good friendship ought to guide our actions requires no complex logical proofs or philosophical deduction. Only an open heart towards others that strives continually to emulate the love our Savior has demonstrated for all of time. Perhaps through civilizational arrogance, we have forgotten the place of community. The modern friendless soul is profoundly lonely as a result of its individual-centered structure and values. Individualism brought on by democratic systems, as diagnosed by Tocqueville in his famous writings on American democracy, means that each man is forever thrown back on himself alone, and there is danger that he may be shut up in the solitude of his own heart. But more importantly, the love that we have for one another will falter in times of need, turning us away from the God of love. Without the vision of community and friendship, we will lose the rich blessings that are to come from a nation that is thoroughly infused with the reality of friendship. The friendship problem is not a phenomenon that is new to the American spirit. We have encountered troubled social connections during the Gilded Age, where gluttonous wealth overpowered institutions and revitalized associative groups and friendships during the Progressive Era, which marked active reform. Even from America's inception, as Tocqueville has noted, American associations are what binds together a perpetual will toward virtue, and when Americans have conceived a sentiment or an idea that they want to produce before the world, they seek each other out, and when found, they unite. Americans can take comfort that the eternal issue of friendship has an equally ancient and steadfast remedy. If you turn back to the ancient sense of relations or consider literature and art as a discipline worth contemplating, we can slow the decline of our civilization. Throughout all of history, humans have struggled with the hard questions of life through physical and spiritual dialectics with their companions. Our inability to transcend the robotic contractual relationships that are coddled by mindsets focused on consumption rather than charity means that soon the Christian fraternity we share with one another will be next in line to fall. It is one thing to proclaim the love of Jesus, but to be a true friend to others is how we draw closer to our Maker and see each other as He loves us.
Thank you very much. And I would like to begin just investigating a little bit of the implications you're drawing for our civil relationships. Very curious, Aristotle does say a lot about the political unions that we have and how they relate to a disposition of friendship. And, you know, I don't oftentimes think of my obligations to my fellow American citizens as being closely related to that of friendship. When my friend is in need, and my friend comes to me and says, you know, I need your help. Wouldn't you help me? And I can see if I refuse that, if I just say, well, I'm sorry, this is your problem, it really negates any concept of friendship that I would have with that person. And yet, you know, somebody comes to me, I have no idea who they are, they come to me and say, look, I'm in need, I want you to help me. I'm your fellow American citizen. You should show me the friendship of a citizen. That seems to be a little beyond what I would expect of my obligations to my fellow citizen. And, you know, and that kind of gets extrapolated to the larger sphere of you say, well, the wealthy should help out the poor in this country. And the wealthy should be friends to the poor. And so the wealthy have kind of an obligation to help the poor. So, you know, get ready for high taxation, graduated income tax. How much do you think the image that Aristotle gives of our political association and its similarity to friendship should be taken?
So my understanding of Aristotle is that he describes friendship as connecting the citizens in order to make such political decisions such as, welfare and taxation. And the goal of this paper was not to make any sort of political assertion as far as how we ought to treat other people in the lives we live, but more of how we come together in a nation and have a bond, that we can come and unite and make political decisions. Last night on the flight here, I was on a plane with a few Marine recruits, and there was a lot of nervous excitement, obviously, and you can sort of feel it's palpable that they're trying to pursue a higher order of the country, of defending your country. And however, I often hear when warriors, soldiers, they come back from battle, they don't describe the reason or the motivation for why they fought the way they did so valiantly was because of the Constitution or a piece of paper or this idea of a social contract. They fought because they wanted to care for the person next to them. And so similarly in the sense that that motivation that bonds us together as citizens allows us to create a society where we can achieve those higher goals and come to a consensus about what we believe is true as far as taking care of other people.
Mm-hmm. And it's curious also, Aristotle says that fundamentally man is a social creature, that we are meant to kind of live in groups. And by that he seems not, he says that, he says something about that the social creature is not just the fact like you live together like animals sharing the same trough, but that you share this human concept of friendship and this sort of responsibility we take to one another. And yet, I, as a good old, red streak American Republican, I don't like the idea of social values entering into my understanding of our political order. I kind of like, when it comes to political order, I like the idea of individualism. And everybody needs to do things the old-fashioned way, earn it yourself. And so how far would you say Aristotle, if you take this Aristotle's notion of friendship and how that applies to the social order, really kind of takes you in what we might call a socialist direction?
So your question is, to what extent does that friendship flow into the political sphere?
Yeah, if you're going to talk about man as a social creature, which means a creature fundamentally bound together by normal human bonds of friendship, how much does that give you a vision for the social order, which is not individualistic, but you might say falling after social values that would be exhibited in the broad context of culture?
Well, I think there is a limit to where that friendship becomes, and I talk about privacy. I do think there ought to be things that are private, but I think when we have a society that prefers the technology to be encumbered or to have a barrier between our interactions, I think ultimately that's where the society will fall. And so as far as, I think we're a little bit far from becoming a socialist society as by following this. I think Aristotle's vision is much more relating to how we relate to each other externally from politics rather than prescribing a specific political idea or philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking about the family model, where within the context of family, we see the obligations of social responsibility as being very high. If I decided that, I was going to feed my children, provide them health care, say, look, kid, you're 6, you can go on and, raise your own food. I would be seen as very negligent as a father. I have a certain social obligation that, because of our social relationship, is required of me. And Aristotle says the parent-child relationship is similar to friendship. It's not the same thing as a friendship, but he says it can become like a friendship. And but in the family relationship, there's a great deal of social responsibility that's had. And if we are going to think of our society as our national bond as a type of friendship, how much does that translate in? I mean, if you're going to see that, if you're going to say that, in a sense, if you're an American citizen, you're my friend, how much does that translate into social obligations that should be expressed politically?
So, to that point about the family, I do think the family does have incredible social obligation, and it's different from the individual in the sense that families are modular. They are comparable. There's a father, there's a mother, there's children, and when you deal with individual, they're different. They're tall, they're short, they're female, they're male. And so as far as comparing obligations, I think the family is a much better understanding of what it means to have a community, to live with people, to learn how to deal with others, and caring for the poor, understanding that there are obligations that we ought to pursue, that there is a government out there that is God ordained, and that we ought to become part of that institution, rather than sort of an individual pursuit of my own economic success, or that I'm in this by myself, that it's a race that I need to win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, coming back to the military example, those guys are going off into the military. I, as an American citizen, feel an obligation to them that if they are going to go into battle to preserve the freedom of our country, I should be quite happy to do whatever I need to make sure they go into battle with the best training, best machinery, best equipment they need to be successful. And that I have a social obligation to them because of that. If I were to say, yeah, thanks for signing up for the military, you're on your own, buddy. Make sure you buy yourself a good tank. That would be a remarkable neglect of my social obligation to them. How much further does that sort of social obligation translate to, the policemen, firemen, school teachers, the local grocer who's kept our grocery store running? How much should I understand that I have a social obligation to them as well?
I think there is a sense of, I think viscerally we understand that, what the military does is important, and policemen, what they do is important. And when we get closer towards commercial activity, going to the store and shopping, there is a sense of contractual agreement, and that's why I talk about in my paper, these things that love or a relationship that is essentially used up once, the need is fulfilled. And so I'm not necessarily saying there's a problem with that. I'm just saying that those exist, and those don't bring to bear kind of a deeper sense of fighting for an eternal value, whether that's fighting for your freedom or fighting for justice in the courts, or in the society.
Mm-hmm. One more question. How much does the sense of friendship enter into even our commercial relations? For example, if you were to come to me and say, you know what, Mr. Hendricks, I want to buy your car. And I were to sell you my car knowing that there are real problems with it. But I'd look at you and say, Liam, this guy's not too sharp about sizing up a car. He's trusting me. So I'm just going to sell him and get the best price I can from him. And you find out I just sold you a real lemon for top dollar. You come back to me and say, hey, why'd you do that to me? I thought we were friends. So I thought it was an economic interaction. How much does the economic interaction carry the weight of that sense of doing well to your friend?
Yeah, there is definitely a sense of honesty and integrity that you ought to show your friend and show anyone in a business setting. And I guess what I mean by an economic agreement is that there is an understanding that this car is well running and that you will exchange payment for that. And so once that we have reached that agreement, there ought to be a mutual and honest exchange of that. And there is, I think, a sense of duty in the relationship sense in that commercial society. And so I think when it becomes perverse, we in a capital-focused society will tend to degenerate towards just trying to milk everyone for their dollars and give them the worst product possible, rather than giving something that is well made and well thought out.
Mm-hmm. And is that a duty that I have to you as an American citizen? I mean, if I was selling it to a Canadian, it's okay to.
I think, yeah, I ripped it all off. As an American who is not a Christian, if you're American who is not a Christian, I am American and Christian, you will, I think that friendship sort of ends where America begins. And however, if you're American and you're a Christian, or a Christian and American like I am, that extends to everyone, and it extends to the, that love extends to everyone who Christ died for, and that's, the whole world.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. Further questions?
Love your paper. I really enjoyed it. So my question is, it's been a while since I read this part of Aristotle, but as I recall, Aristotle says that the truest sort of friendship, there is reciprocity in it. In order to avoid it becoming exploitative, which would not be true friendship, there must be reciprocity. So I suppose my question is, how can we consider it that sort of friendship if we extend it to enemies or to people who do not reciprocate, people who only want to exploit that relationship? How can we consider that friendship?
I think if you have a Christ-centered understanding, I do think, if you don't come at it from a religious perspective, I think it's easy to say, well, he hurt me, and so therefore an eye for an eye. And as Christians, we're called to turn the other cheek, and so ultimate friendship is towards Christ, and our understanding of friendship comes from His example of everyone, and so. While it may not be pleasant necessarily, and it doesn't subscribe to that pleasure or utility that you would find in a expedient friendship, loving your enemies is still ascribing towards that higher friendship that we have with Christ, and so there is a higher goal there.
So would you say that that sort of friendship is a friendship almost with Christ instead of with the actual person that you're extending it to?
Right. So my understanding of friendship is that it brings us towards a higher, towards God, and a good friendship will do that, and you will see God through them, and you will love, when you love others, when you love everyone, as God loves everyone, then that's how you draw closer to God.
Okay, really love your paper. You read it very well, and your examples were interesting. You talk a lot about how our society fails to see the nuance of human experiences within friendship. And I was just wondering, there seems to be this tendency in our society to see like a very deep and intimate loving friendship and immediately say, oh, there's romantic interest in there, like that's all it is. Would you say that is a failure on our part to, like that is another failure of to see nuance, or like how would you explain that tendency?
Yeah, I definitely do think that our society lacks just deep friendship and fellowship, not just the romantic side, but also, a deep love between two men is, sometimes characterized as something that it's not. And to really love someone as they are is lost. And recently I had a friend who told me that, the new Stranger Things season came out, and she canceled her plans to go, be out with her friends to watch the whole, season in one day. And certainly I don't think that there's something inherently morally wrong about that, but when you have a society that consistently does something like that, you will lose, a nuanced form of friendship where you interact with people and live with them.
Thank you.
So, again, fantastic paper. By way of a preamble, you got me thinking about TikTok houses. Harpers.org last year did a whole article on how there's a peculiar anxiety of those influencers. They're always turning out content, and they're always feeling terribly because they're being rated by others. Which reminds me of the Hunger Games and Black Mirror, 15 Million Merits, and another movie called The Platform. But anyway, moving toward my question, within your paper, I also find strands that are evocative of like 2 Corinthians 5:6. So from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view. Though we once regarded Christ in this way, we do so no longer. I also got tinges of Romans 12:5. So in Christ we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. In 1 Corinthians 12:15-26, Paul has a longer bit about how we're members of each other and so on and so forth. And then in Galatians 2:20, we get that bit about, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. So building on those sort of passages, I'm kind of trying to think along Mr. H's questions about how this goes into political spheres, how this spills out. And for me, one of the places that I look at is Acts 4:32 through 35. One last quote. All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claims that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. For from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. End quote. So I guess where I'm going with that is because there's such a strong Christological message in here, would you say that we should embody that sort of an economy? Or do you think that we should find ways to, do you think that was back then and not so much something that should always be embodied?
Yeah, so I actually wrote an article about that particular verse. If I can find it. I remember thinking about this particular passage, and I think it's very special that those Christians chose to do that, and they were charitable and they were well-intentioned. The problem is when we've ever tried to exercise that through government, I think we've found that we've ended up with the reverse of that, where you have, a very strong dictator who, violently takes away people's possessions and forces them to work in, a commune or something of that sort. And so, to answer your question, I think we ought to live in the situation we've been given, which is a capitalist society, and we ought to pursue our friendship with others through that. And so, our foremost allegiance is obviously to God and not towards any system. And so, if that demands, if there's the poor, then we provide for them. If there's, poverty, we take care of that. And so, regardless of what situation we're living in, there is a command of how we ought to live. And that's a very individual charge. And which is what I was trying to get along with this paper. It's not go out and reform the world. It is go out and have lunch with your friends,
Do you think technology necessarily serves as a detriment to building the kind of friendships that you talk about in your paper? Or do you think it's a tool that can be used better? And if so, how do you think we're using it wrong? And could we use it better in some way?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a tool that is amoral. There's no right or wrong with that. It's helpful to be able to shoot a text or go online, check something out. But when we replace that, when we pour it into the molds of what good friendship is supposed to create, then we end up with a society that is broken, and we end up with a society where we have people willing to go and shoot up a school, right? There's deep loneliness, and it's not just that technology is a substitute. Like, technology is not just it can't be a substitute for good friendship, because you've probably experienced this before. I think most people have experienced this before. If you go to a party and you don't know anyone there, you almost feel more lonely than you would just be alone. That's kind of how I think technology interacts with us, where we are surrounded by people, but we're not with them. We're not in communion with them. And so to be with people, to love people, to live well in pursuit of that friendship is something that's beautiful, and that will bring you to a sense of using technology correctly and for the right purpose.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your paper, and what you were saying in the paper, what Mr. H was saying, and this young gentleman over here was saying, kind of made me think about when I was younger, a long time ago, but not out of the realm of reason. On our street, when if someone had a baby, some of the women would bring dinners and food over every day because the husband couldn't cook. He was at work and the mother was recuperating, and that has kind of you don't see. I don't even know my neighbors anymore, and we really live close where the way our house is, but we don't know them. And I was thinking about when I was in high school, learning about the Benevolent Society in early America, how private citizens got together and formed organizations for like people that were alcoholics or for orphan children and things like that. And it seems to me that government taking over, like with welfare and everything, has robbed the citizens of the connection that we used to have, because but for the grace of God go I, you know, you would think that, so that would make you want to help someone you saw in need. Now it's, well, the government can take care of them. So now then, in the world that we live in now with government here, what would you suggest how we go about making those connections?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the neighbors thing, because I'm going to college next year, and a few fraternities have reached out to me, and some of their advertising spiels of that, we're huge. We have 150 members, and some you will join and you won't even know their other people's names, and they act like it's a good thing. It's called a fraternity, right? And so yeah, I really relate to that sort of. You don't know your neighbors. You don't know who you're even in a fraternity with. It's called a fraternity. And so Robert Putnam, you probably have heard of him. He's a Harvard researcher, and he's actually quite liberal in most things. But he wrote a book called Bowling Alone. And in this book, he discusses the decline of American community groups like, Alcoholics Anonymous and the Boy Scouts and, these organizations that once held up the social order. And so, to me, I see it as, I think friendship comes first. We don't revitalize our country by making a Boy Scout troop. We don't, continue by sort of forcing it, by making community groups, that no one will come to. We start by taking your friend out to lunch, checking in with them, maybe through text, but just being with presence in the presence of people, and following that, you will get these community groups. And the reason why I think American community groups were so good was because we did have that sort of private people coming together and, truly bonding. And then out of that sprouted the community groups that we once appreciated. I think, didn't you ready to ask? I'll go with the person there.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that you're an online GPT fiver. So I actually did years 1 and 2 local, and then did years 3 through 5 online. And it got me thinking, what do you think, where does presence, being physically close to people, come into play? I know over the last 2 years there's been a multitude of different online formats, whether it be for church services, for hangouts, and I just wonder if you can have the same level of friendship through distance, but other means like technology, opposed to needing that physical presence.
Yeah, absolutely. I would have loved to be a local student. I would have loved to come in every week, but that was kind of the alternative that we were given, and I think I certainly learned much more online than I did sitting in public school learning about, Isaac Newton or something. Yeah, there is a sense of presence that's very important, and that's why I try to get across. Going to lunch with someone, not FaceTiming them. Going to church, dressing up and not in your pajamas and eating breakfast, going to church and seeing the building that, has the intricate windows and stained glass windows and the cross, being there and just, enjoying your presence. And Mr. Hendricks talks a lot about, the ability to just look at a flower and to just be there, be present, and not think, I'm looking at a flower and the flower has petals, just to experience it. And I think that's something similar is true in friendship, that there is just a sense of I'm with you and I am, for you.
So you gave friendship, it was a really good paper, by the way. Friendship is one of my favorite topics because it's so many levels, but you gave friendship a lot of fun. There are 2 places in the Bible that really resonate with me about friendship. Is when Jesus says, I no longer talk to you or see you as disciples, but I see you as friends. And there's another place in James 3 when he talks about how active faith, and he talks about Abraham, and he says that because he had faith in God, he was called friend of God. And I wonder if in your evaluating friendship and the 3 types of friendship that Aristotle talks about, you consider friendship with God. What does that look like? And is that something that makes us better friends? or is that a leveling up to a level 4 friendship that Aristotle didn't know to write about?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I wrote this paper primarily out of a frustration of when I was in Sunday school, people would tell me a lot that in all things, work heartily for the Lord, everything that you're doing, relates to God in some way. And I always was frustrated with that. Like, how does, building a TV or, writing some notes for school, how does that lead you to God? But I think in friendship, we see the truest example of that, where we can just say, oh, I love God. But how does that play out? How do we come to be in communion and friendship with God? I think it's through others. And we see the way that God loves us through the actions of other people. And people who are Christian and people who are not, we'll experience that. And it's through our living in the world and interacting with those people that we come to see God and understand Him. Not through just maybe attending church or something, it's not just an action that you do, it's something you live out consistently. And I think that's the place of godly friendship. I don't think it's a tier 4 friendship. I don't think it's something that takes time, is found through other friendships.
Alright, going off a couple of previous questions, I was wondering how you think of, like, nowadays people travel distances that previously would have been just unimaginable. And we're able to go really far to see our friends and choose, like, oh, I prefer this church, so I'm just going to go there, even though it's further from, like, the church down the street. And I was wondering if you consider that as sort of a loss to community and to those deeper friendships, instead of establishing a relationship with the people who are, like, right there. You're just traveling so far and it feels like you're not even really getting what you're looking for.
Yeah, I definitely think there's kind of a cultural movement towards cosmopolitanism, where people think it's kind of cool to, oh, I don't have a home, I just travel everywhere, I'm a consultant, I visit all these places, but you really don't have a home, right? And you really don't have the people to be with. And with your church example, if you disagree completely with the theology, I think there's ultimately a very religious sense of that you have to change churches. But it's like if you just pick on the little details rather than understanding that the church is made up of people, then I think you'll come to understand that maybe there's an importance in just being with those who are close to you in your community, not just flying around everywhere trying to find or experience all these landmarks and history.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee.